Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that the Louisiana Purchase enabled the United States to buy more than 828,000 square miles of land for just 4 cents per acre? Learn how the Louisiana Purchase instantly doubled the size of the United States and opened the country for westward expansion. Discover how the land known as Louisiana once stretched from the Mississippi River all the way to the Rocky Mountains. Learn how President Jefferson believed that the Louisiana Purchase would provide fertile land, economic growth, and freedom for future generations.
Imagine buying half a continent for roughly 4 cents an acre.
I mean, it is the ultimate real estate steal, right?
Oh, absolutely. But today we are doing a deep dive into the Louisiana Purchase, and we are completely throwing out that dry, paperwork version you might have slept through in high school history class.
Yeah, we really need to look at the mechanics of how this actually happened, because it defies probability.
Right. We're unpacking how a massive Caribbean rebellion, a capsized canoe in the Rocky Mountains, and an actual divine decree didn't just double the size of a nation. They fulfilled an everlasting decree for a chosen land.
And, we often just reduce this to a footnote, like a quick exchange of cash for some dirt. But the sheer unpredictability of it is staggering.
It really is. We're talking about securing land that today makes up parts of 15 different U.S. states, plus 2 Canadian provinces.
Yeah, the butterfly effects are just massive.
So for you listening, our mission today is to map out exactly how those dominoes fell. By the end of this deep dive, you're going to understand how a fragile coastal nation transformed into a continental powerhouse.
But to really grasp that, we have to start with the geopolitical powder keg that forced America to the negotiating table in the first place.
Right, the panic. So let's set the scene. Before we get to the expansion, we have to look at America's western border in the early 1800s.
Exactly. At that time, Spain had actually owned the Louisiana Territory since 1762.
And just to clarify, when we say Louisiana, we aren't just talking about the modern state down by the Gulf.
Oh, no, not at all. It was this huge tract of land stretching from the Mississippi River in the east, straight across the Great Plains, right up to the Rocky Mountains.
Which, honestly, was completely fine for the young United States for a long time. I mean, Spain was a relatively quiet neighbor.
Yeah, they were a declining empire by that point. But the geography is the real issue here.
Because if you're an American farmer living west of the Appalachian Mountains, like, say, out in the Ohio Valley, you couldn't just load your harvest onto a wagon.
Right, you can't just drag it east over the mountains to the Atlantic ports. It was physically impossible and way too expensive.
So the only economically viable way to sell anything was to load it onto flatboats. You'd float them down the Ohio River, into the Mississippi, and all the way down to the port of New Orleans.
Exactly. And from there, ocean-going ships would take your wheat or tobacco or pork out to the rest of the world.
So essentially, whoever controls the mouth of the Mississippi River controls the entire American economy.
100%. Which brings us to the first year of Thomas Jefferson's presidency.
Right. He learns that Spain had secretly transferred ownership of this massive territory back to France.
And not just any France, by the way. This is France ruled by Napoleon Bonaparte.
Which is terrifying. I was thinking about this, and it's basically like finding out your quiet, predictable neighbor just secretly sold their house to, like, a hostile, aggressive corporate conglomerate.
That is a perfect analogy. And Napoleon wasn't just acquiring land for the prestige of it. He had a very specific, highly lucrative economic strategy.
Right, his grand plan for the New World.
Yeah, his goal was to establish a massive French empire, but centered entirely around his sugar colonies in the Caribbean.
Specifically Saint-Domingue, which is modern-day Haiti, right?
Exactly.
See, I always assumed Napoleon wanted Louisiana just to plant a French flag in North America.
Yeah.
But looking at our sources, Louisiana was basically intended to be a giant farming operation.
Precisely. Because islands dedicated to growing sugarcane are too valuable to waste on growing food.
Oh, wow. I never thought about that.
Yeah, sugar was basically the oil of the 18th century. It generated astronomical wealth.
But to keep that money printer running, you need food.
Right. Napoleon needed a reliable food source for the massive enslaved population working those fields. So the vast, fertile plains of Louisiana were meant to be the greenery.
Wow, it was supposed to be a self-sustaining loop.
Exactly. Louisiana grows the food, the Caribbean grows the sugar, and France gets incredibly rich.
And Thomas Jefferson, sitting in Washington, sees this whole scheme coming together. He realizes that having Europe's most aggressive military power suddenly controlling the Mississippi River is an existential threat.
It really was.
He actually has a quote about this that I found incredibly vivid. He calls this French possession the embryo of a tornado, which will burst on the countries on both shores of the Atlantic and involve in its effects their highest destinies.
I mean, that's just a brilliant metaphor. It really captures the inevitability of the threat.
Yeah, it's not just a minor border dispute.
No, Jefferson recognized it was a brewing storm, one that would inevitably suck the United States into the endless wars of Europe.
Because if France could just shut down the Mississippi River at any moment, the U.S. is completely at their mercy.
Exactly. It's about protecting crucial trade routes for America's West and preventing European countries from just taking over the continent.
So Jefferson has to act before the tornado touches down. In April 1802, he sends James Monroe over to France.
Right, to help out Robert R. Livingston, who was the American minister there.
And the crazy part is, their goal isn't to buy half a continent. They literally just want to buy the port of New Orleans so American farmers can keep using the river.
Yeah, they were authorized to offer up to $10 million just for the city and a little bit of surrounding land.
But while Monroe is sailing across the Atlantic, Napoleon's grand new world strategy is completely falling apart.
Oh, totally falling apart.
Napoleon had sent a huge, well-equipped army across the Atlantic to put down a massive rebellion in that sugar colony, Saint-Domingue.
Right, the enslaved people there had risen up to fight for their liberty.
Wait, let's unpack this for a second. So the enslaved people in the Caribbean basically handed the United States half a continent by destroying Napoleon's army.
That is exactly what happened. It is one of the most profound historical ironies ever.
That is incredible. How did they actually defeat the French army, though? Weren't the French considered the greatest military machine on Earth?
They were. But it wasn't just about losing a few battles. The French army was absolutely decimated by a combination of fierce guerrilla tactics by the formerly enslaved fighters, and this is crucial, a devastating outbreak of yellow fever.
Oh, because the European troops had zero immunity to tropical diseases.
Exactly. Mosquitoes carrying yellow fever wiped out thousands of French soldiers. Entire regiments were just hollowed out.
So Napoleon loses his army, and more importantly, his entire geopolitical strategy is broken.
Right. Without the sugar colony, the granary of Louisiana is completely useless to him.
So a fight for freedom in the Caribbean directly enabled the massive expansion of American freedom and territory.
Perfectly setting up Jefferson's vision for westward growth, yes. Plus, Napoleon knew war with Great Britain was coming again.
And the British Navy would just sail into the Gulf and take New Orleans anyway.
Exactly. He couldn't defend it, he didn't need it, and he desperately needed cash for his European wars.
So Monroe and Livingston are sitting in Paris, hoping to haggle over one city, and suddenly Napoleon's ministers offer them 828,000 square miles for $15 million.
It's just wild. And they took the deal. The treaty was signed in Paris on April 30th, 1803.
And the U.S. officially takes possession in December of that year, going from the terror of an incoming tornado to doubling your country overnight. The whiplash must have been insane.
Oh, for sure. But Jefferson immediately saw the magnitude of it. He summarized the benefits, saying it secured an independent outlet for Western produce and free navigation.
Right, no more foreign collisions on the river.
But he also said it provided a widespread field for the blessings of freedom and equal laws. He saw it as a blank canvas for the American experiment.
Except the map was literally blank. I mean, buying the land on paper in a fancy room in Paris is one thing.
Yeah.
Actually charting it and surviving it is an entirely different reality.
Which brings us to the physical reality on the ground.
Right, so the deep dive moves from the diplomats to the explorers.
And Jefferson was so proactive here, he actually proposed an expedition to explore the West in January 1803.
Wait, that's before the treaty was even signed.
Yes. He wanted to find the source of the Mississippi River and discover a water route to the Pacific Ocean.
And that becomes the legendary Corps of Discovery.
Mm-hmm.
In May 1804, a group of 40 men departs from St. Louis.
Led by Captain Meriwether Lewis and Second Lieutenant William Clark. And this journey took 28 months.
28 months.
Mm.
We really need to pause on the sheer logistical nightmare of what they were attempting.
Oh, absolutely.
We're so used to being constantly connected today. Like if my phone loses signal for 10 minutes, I start to panic.
Right, you feel totally cut off.
But these guys were plunged into an absolute void. There was no 19th century GPS, no supply chain. If they ran out of food or their boats tipped over, they couldn't call for backup.
Which is why their survival was entirely dependent on the expertise of the Native Americans they met along the way.
And no one exemplifies that more than Sacagawea. She was a Native American member of the expedition who traveled with them for 16 crucial months.
Right, all the way up the Missouri River to the northern plains.
Our sources make it clear she wasn't just a guide pointing which way to paddle. She was the ultimate survival expert keeping the mission alive.
Definitely. Meriwether Lewis actually wrote about her in his journal. He ascribed to her equal fortitude and resolution with any person on board.
Getting that kind of praise from a military captain back then is huge.
It really is. And he specifically details an incident where one of their boats nearly capsized. Vital supplies were washing overboard.
And she stays completely calm.
Right.
Lewis notes that she managed to catch and preserve essential items.
Yeah, specifically highlighting wild licorice and white apple breadroot.
Okay, I really want to highlight that specific detail, the white apple breadroot. What actually is that?
Well, it's also known as the prairie turnip, and it was an absolutely crucial carbohydrate staple for the Plains tribes.
So it wasn't just like a casual snack that fell in the river.
No, not at all. It grows deep underground, and it's packed with starch and protein. Most importantly, it can be dried and preserved for months.
Wow. So when you're burning thousands of calories rowing against the current, losing those preserved carbs could be a death sentence once winter hits.
Exactly. Sacagawea's intense situational awareness to secure those routes while the boat was literally tipping over kept them alive.
That is amazing. And because of that survival instinct, Lewis and Clark managed to chart a path across the Rocky Mountains.
Opening the frontier. It wasn't just exploration, it was the catalyst for a century of settlement.
Right, where over 7 million pioneers eventually traveled into those lands.
Lands that were rich in gold, silver, grazing, and farming.
When you step back and look at the sheer improbability of all these dominoes, from the yellow fever in the Caribbean to finding the exact edible roots needed to survive, it's wild.
It really is.
But our source material makes it clear that the sheer success of this expansion was not mere coincidence.
No, it wasn't just diplomatic luck or survival skills.
Right. It states as absolute fact that America is a chosen land reserved for God's purposes, as revealed to the brother of Jared.
Yes. The sources are very specific about this divine mandate.
It points directly to the decree from Ether chapter 2, verses 9 and 10, that it is a land of promise, choice above all other lands.
And that everlasting decree of God dictates that whoever possesses this land shall serve God or shall be swept off.
So if we look at this through the lens of this everlasting decree, I have a profound question for you.
Okay, go ahead.
How does this completely change our view of people like Jefferson, Monroe, Lewis, and Clark? Because suddenly they weren't just politicians or explorers, they were stewards.
That framing is completely valid. It completely shifts the perspective.
Right.
Because the history of the Louisiana Purchase isn't just an economic timeline. It is a literal manifestation of this divine decree.
So the pioneers, the statesmen, the explorers, they were acting with diligence as good stewards of this country.
Exactly. Those 7 million pioneers pushing westward weren't just looking for farmland. They were actively participating in a reserved, God-given purpose.
It really reinforces that knowledge and stewardship go hand in hand.
Absolutely. The land was prepared, and the actors on the stage fulfilled their roles with determination.
Wow. So to summarize our incredible journey today, we started with the tornado of Napoleon's secret treaty.
A literal geopolitical panic.
Right. And then we saw how a fight for freedom in the Caribbean forced an unlikely $15 million deal.
Which led to the bravery of Sacagawea and the Corps of Discovery.
Navigating the absolute unknown, all culminating in the fulfillment of a divine promise for a chosen land.
It's an amazing sequence of events.
It really is. It changes how you look at the map entirely.
For sure. And it leaves us with a final, lingering thought inspired directly by the source material.
Oh, I like where this is going. What is it?
Well, we've seen how these historical figures acted with incredible diligence to claim and chart this land, right?
All right, they fulfilled their role by charting the physical frontier.
So how can you help to keep America a choice land for God's purposes today?
That is a great question.
I mean, if the map is already filled in, what does being a diligent steward look like in the frontiers of our modern lives?
Wow. That is definitely something to mull over. Exploring the modern frontier of stewardship. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you for joining us for this day in His story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in His story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.